Hi, everyone. Welcome to A Way of God's Remembrance with Michael Hayes. This is presented by Awake to Love. I'm Lee here with Cindy. We are the volunteer Zoom hosts and so grateful that you are here. As a way of introduction, I will read Michael's words to bring clarity to the focus and format of this gathering. This is a weekly gathering for those seeking greater awareness of their true nature. There are many paths and approaches to higher consciousness and to greater awakening to who we truly are. The essence, the truth of all these paths is more about remembering who we are and have always been, rather than becoming something different or more than we have seen ourselves to be. A way of God's remembrance goes to the heart, to the intention of all the paths. This is what we will explore together each week. Michael will share thoughts and awarenesses that come forward as relevant and purposeful for our time together, followed by questions and answers related to what he shares about. We will begin with an invocation of light to help support us all to be in collective alignment. Reverend Ron Holnick will lead us in the light invocation. After the light invocation, we will play a recording to lead us in Anai Hugh chanting.
Go ahead, honey.
All right. Lord God of all creation, we come forward this evening with love in our hearts, for in truth, that's all that is really there. We ask just now that we step into that awareness, excuse me, and that we share it to the fullest extent possible. And we are so aware of the times we live in and how much love we will put forward in service to that essence. So be it.
Welcome everyone to
a way of God's remembrance. It's beautiful to be with you all and to experience the peace and the togetherness of spirit that is already present. I'm in a quiet place, kind of a deep place for myself, actually. And as I begin this, I'm always just opening myself up to see what is present, that what could be shared for the highest good that would be of service and support to all of us. And I'm acutely aware in the spiritual world of several great archangels. And mm, on the once a month class or class, let's say gathering, was not a class, but that we have, and my wife Alicia is present, we often get into more to deal with angels, the great angels. And I'm very aware of them and have been aware that they're an integral part of all the spiritual work. And I don't talk about them nearly so much because I don't have a focus upon them in that way. However, sometimes it seems like their focus is upon me, but is really upon the work that's going on. So I work to be as available as I can to the spirit in all the forms that works with us. In my work with John Roger over many years, there was a lot of visitations by great archangels, and often Archangel Michael or Gabriel. And I can remember one time I was just got over to his house and he wasn't quite there. He was coming in late. So I was sitting there. He came in and he made a comment. It says, just made a comment. Oh, great Archangel Michael's here. This is going to be a good one. And so these great archangels are integrally involved in the awakening of consciousness and the work of God and spirit. They are not simply the messengers of God, but they're integral into the carrying out of the higher purpose of God. In many ways, they are a exampleship to us of a truly surrendered consciousness, because their nature is to exist and express from a very surrendered place. And their surrender is to God, but particularly to God's wishes or will or intent for them. They are surrendered to it and instruments of that in an extraordinary way. So I'm grateful for the support and their availability. I'm actually not that comfortable with it often because when today great Archangel Michael showed up, and I was resisting it, I must admit, most of the day. And there's a power with that consciousness that I am very, very aware of, and that it's a bit of a stretch for me to receive it and to partake of it and avail myself to it more than I have with other aspects of the spirit that come forward to work. But anyway, so I'm letting you know he's come to play with us. Maybe he'll be here for 2 minutes or the whole time. I don't know. And there's an activation going on to each and every person that is present on this call at this point. And he says, even into those who will see it later, of not simply divine remembrance, but divine surrender, the capacity in each of us to give over to the higher power of God, the higher presence of spirit, and to let ourselves be used to the service of God, to the service of awakening others, to the service of the instrumentation of this creation to God's higher purpose of learning. And there's an empowerment that comes with this archangel that is quite extraordinary. There's such a strong sense of the power of the will being surrendered to a greater will, and the availability of that power that comes to us when we surrender. And surrendering is an odd word in a way, because when we say we're going to surrender to God or God's will, what does that really mean? Because we're still thinking, we're still breathing, and we're still living, and we're still conscious that we have this self and this body and our own story of life. And what I'm hearing is it says, for a moment, forego your attachment to your story and to your struggles and to your dramas and to the adventure of living in flesh, and be available to a higher knowing, to a higher call that reaches from the heart of God in and through all reality and calls you back to your place in the great purpose of God that is inclusive of your human experience, but it is even more so involved with a higher purpose of why you took on the human form, why you took even on the soulic form, why you took on any form of individuality consciousness to the greater gain and to the greater glorification of God. The truth of us as servants of God and servants of a higher purpose is as eternal for us as our remembrance that we are not this form, that we are not these bodies, we are not this human story. We are an individuation of God itself. And when we get into that remembered state, that individuated state, we can witness that all the purposes and all the intentions and all those consciousnesses of spirit that work to serve those intentions of God, it all coalesces into one purpose as part of one design, the design of God doing God in us and through us and for us, and in and through all reality. And this messaging of the togetherness that we share in this oneness is an essential part of the messaging of the great angels, that they are amplifiers of this, that consciousness that has partaken in the flesh and in time and space, to assist it to come back to its surrendered state to God's will. When we come into the human expression, we enter into an experience of choice that is really very confounding to us, because we lose track of our divine connection normally when we take on the human form. And so it's like we have free choice, but we're cut off from that would show us or inform us of how to use that choice wisely. And then we get to have our adventure in time and space of figuring that out. And it's reminiscent to me of some things I've done before, where It'd be like you're in a place and you're blindfolded, or it's a completely dark room, and then you have to try and find something. And at first, we're just kind of groping around and banging into things. But in time, we become more patient. We get quieter inside. We recognize that there are clues, and there has been learning occurring while we were banging around and bumping into things and just demonstrating that we really were lost. And that if we will get into that quiet, that centered place, a knowing will appear in us, through us, and for us of how to proceed. And that there will be a feedback system operating within our consciousness that will tell us when we're on course and when we're off course. And as we come into the utilization of this feedback source, we come into a attunement, an alignment with higher purpose. And in that alignment and attunement, there's a peace. Like suddenly we're in the center of the river and we're just flowing and floating. It's a wonderful thing when we're there. We've all had it. We just have never been quite clear how in our humanness to stay in that. We try to hold on to it, and that actually just undermines it because we can't grab it. We have to surrender, in a sense, to its embrace. But if we try to reach out to embrace it, we lose it. It's sort of like that idea, like the butterfly comes and lands where it would. But if you try and close your hand on the butterfly, you crush it. So you go, oh, it's here, and it's so beautiful, and you hope the butterfly will stay forever, but it goes when it goes, comes when it comes. This is the way the spirit is with us, but it invites us into this attunement, this togetherness with spirit, where we can experience our oneness with the butterfly, our oneness with everything. So this is a component of remembrance that I have found has been a addition to my experience level with the spirit and my growth in greater consciousness. Though I've had experiences with angels since I was a child and knew they were there, they weren't really a focus for me. And interestingly, I got into a relationship with somebody who was extremely conscious of them, actually more conscious of them in this world than anybody else I've met. And for a lot of years in the relationship, I was more sort of in the lead as the facilitator, teacher, and I was learning about the angels through her. She was learning about a lot of things through me. But in the last maybe 2 to 3 years, I've really seen an upswing in my opening to this angelic reality in a way that I never really expected I would. And it was interesting that in the awakening of my remembrance, at some point, I woke up into the angelic realm and I was just aware of that realm of reality that I was there. And when I had that awareness that I was there, while I simultaneously had the awareness I was here, I realized that even though I'm in human form in this life, I'm also in the angelic form. Because when I was aware in the angelic realm, I was aware of that too. And I was aware that I had been an angel in many lives, but that I'm still tied into that as a secondary part of my purpose in this life. But in opening to that, I saw how that would also be supportive to this remembrance I talk about. So I'm not telling anybody to do anything around angels or not, but I wouldn't dismiss the value of them and the essentiality of them in all that we do spiritually. I was listening to a seminar fairly recently from John Roger, my spiritual teacher, and I think the spiritual teacher of many people on this call. And he was reflecting that he was mentioning the name of a being whom I knew a lot about from my work with John Roger because he was brought up quite frequently in our work. And um, this would be an archangel that John Roger worked very closely with, who was sort of a protector for John Roger. And in this particular seminar, John Roger referenced that this archangel was actually the Lord of the traveler consciousness. And that if there weren't somebody in the physical world to hold that consciousness, this angel would hold it and hold it until somebody was ready and then turn it over to them. And it was kind of a great reminder that we're not really given these great archangels their due of all they do. There's just a lot they do that hasn't been really focused upon. And I kind of understand that because if we focus on trying to get back to the angelic realm, it's sort of like going sideways. The angelic realm and the human are kind of like parallel existences. But these great archangels, they are this higher order and this higher service. I mean, if we read the Bible and Archangel Gabriel comes to Mary and tells her she's with child as a virgin, and then Archangel Gabriel comes to Elizabeth and announces she's going to be giving birth, and was somebody who was an older woman, had babies past the time when women could have babies, which was John the Baptist. And then Archangel Gabriel came and gave the Quran to Muhammad, and you start going through it called, these are very, very much part of our adventure here. So it's wise for us to include them, or at least keep an openness to them, not as a substitute for the Christ action or for the mystical traveler consciousness and John Morton, John Roger, and those teachers, but as an adjunct that it's in our interest to be available to, because they're working very closely with us and they're working very closely with everyone who's participating in the Christ action, meaning that all consciousness is shifting away from the Luciferian plan on this planet, which is an eye for an eye, into this plan of grace, this opportunity to bring forgiveness and grace into the process of working of karma. They are completely involved in that. And so I'm suggesting that you're all much more involved with these archangels than you may realize. So just be open to that and available to that, because I'm available to it because they make themselves known in such a way I can't ignore them. So that's a little segue into tonight. So I think what we'll do next is I'm going to turn it over to Lee, and he's going to tell you a few things, and then we'll do some sharing, okay?
Mhm.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, great Archangel Michael. Bless you. I'm going to share guidelines for questions. Questions are to be about a way of God's remembrance and what Michael has shared. To ask a question, please raise your Zoom hand. You can find that by hovering near the bottom of your Zoom window. Click on the React button. A pop-up appears. Choose Raise hand. Please also turn on your video for full participation. If you are on a low bandwidth connection and are unable to, so be it. Most important, and since so many of us have had the blessing of working with Michael over so many years for assistance in clearing so many things, this is not that. Please do not ask questions of a personal nature and do not ask Michael for assistance in clearing. Questions are to be for your benefit, the benefit of those of us gathered, and those who will participate via the archives. We ask that you look to the integrity of your intentions before asking a question of Michael, and thank you for your cooperation. Finally, here is the legal consent. By raising your hand and asking questions of Michael, you are giving full consent to Awake to Love to make the audio and video of this gathering, including your sharing, available as online archives for anyone to access. Please do not raise your hand and do not share unless you are in full agreement. Thank you. Michael, hands are manifesting.
Let's start with Richard Powell.
Hello, Michael. Hello, everybody. Much love to you all. Thank you for doing this. What was rolling around, and I'm just going to say what showed up. Would you talk about the line of the travelers? And you had mentioned, once I started rolling around in my head about that, you talked about the angel that, the archangel that John Roger talked that was worked with the travelers. Could you say who that angel is? Anything around that? Anything around remembrance? Thank you.
Well, John Roger called that Archangel Joel, which he usually called him Jody when we were working, but Jody was involved. Jody was a protector for him. He would screen, looking to protect him mostly from psychic negative things, but also just a protector of the work. There's a lot of people better qualified to talk about the line of the travelers. I mean, I would think John Morton, obviously John Roger talked about it a lot. Think of it like the traveler consciousness would be like something that is everywhere and everything, in all manifest reality. If you went to the highest form of consciousness, let's say in the highest absolute form of consciousness, God is pure potential but has no form, but it has the potentiality of any or every form. And in that place where that kind of intersects with the beginnings of form or tangibility, that you would find the traveler there, and then through all that is manifest. It's interesting because in my own process of experiencing being shown things that we would call the traveler consciousness is in everywhere and everything, and is always there in a sense to bring all consciousness eventually back into the remembrance and the oneness with itself. And we could kind of really understand it if you're really experiencing, you realize the traveler is no one. It is not a singularity, but it will create a concentration of itself into as a singularity to anchor itself. Um, it's like a paradoxical thing to talk about it, but it actually to create a greater accessibility. It's like it creates a tangibilization of itself into the time and space and the illusion there to help it to be a bridging for consciousness to come back and to come into participation with it. And through that, to come back into the fuller participation, fuller consciousness, fuller remembrance of the oneness with God. And so I would look at this line of it might be consciousness, a line of those that were where it concentrated itself through a particular form, through a particular consciousness to make that available. So right now, John Morton would be the person I would look to where it's concentrating through into this world. And with John Roger was definitely going on, but when we have knowledge about a lot of masters and teachers through time who've done it, and you can see them in all sorts of religions and approaches, but you also see them sometimes as scientists and sometimes as artists and poets, sometimes as philosophers, because it's a strange thing. It's like, when John Rogers used to say, I could sit up here and say ham and eggs, ham and eggs, ham and eggs, and the same thing would happen. I understand that because it's not so much what he was saying, it's what he was attuned to. It's like saying where he was speaking from. And so you could, let's say, go to Italy and be around any of the works of Michelangelo and get an activation to that. We call that traveler. Somehow it would reconnect you to that truth in you. John Rice used to say the traveler is in all of us. Well, there's nowhere it's not, so of course it is. Well, has it specifically concentrated itself in the same way in all of us? No, but we could come conscious of it as much, just the same way as, or maybe even more so than somebody it's concentrated in because it's truth itself. And if we surrender to the truth that we are one with truth, then we know that truth. So many, many masters through different times and places, and it's just kind of utilizing them. And there's a distinction with each of those masters, even through different traditions. If you study them, you get, oh, there's something activates to me through this one or that one. Sometimes there are people will study those people, and there's very little written about those people. There may be a name that they know from, let's say, the Bible, like maybe in one of the offsprings coming down from Adam, and they say, well, I'm doing some guy, some name, and then people go inside and they have this experience. Where they really have an experience with that being, kind of yes, kind of no. What they really have an experience is with the traveler consciousness and the particular way the traveler consciousness utilize that consciousness creates a particular availability for us to interface with. But if we got lost, and let's say I was connecting to Pythagoras as one of those in the line of the traveler, and I was connecting to it, then that, if I just started seeing, well, the traveler is all about all these things Pythagoras is doing, I would miss the boat. In a sense, we are all in the line of the travelers. It's just it hasn't been activated in the same way for everybody yet. Eventually, everybody comes back to it because in truth, nobody's really ever left it. We've just entered into this forgetfulness by forgetfulness of that truth to live in the pretense of this truth, time and space. but everyone is always part of it. There's nowhere it's not. There's nothing it's not part of. Not even just people, but it interpenetrates all reality. So there you go.
Um, I have another question in terms of there are a lot of us that have been students of the Traveler with JR and John, and it seems like as though we are not the Traveler. It seems like my question is, would you say that there are some people that have an awareness of that consciousness inside of them, even though it's not fully activated to anchor on this planet? I
Yeah,
don't know.
I think so. I
Okay.
bet it's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
I, yeah, I think that's really obvious. See, it's an interesting thing. It doesn't deny itself to any consciousness, but for any conscious to come into awareness of it, and we could say the realization of it, and then a oneness with that, it requires that consciousness to surrender its self story, the story of its separation, the story of its individuation, of its the story of its specialness, um, the story of its incarnation. Even it's like the surrender of all that opens the door to the knowing of that more and more fully.
Yeah.
In
Is
the end, in the end, everybody will come to the realization of their oneness with God, and in that oneness, they will know their oneness with this is called the traveler consciousness. Everyone will.
would you
Now,
say that that is gosh, this is hard to talk about. Would you say that is when what I've been experiencing through your talks, and I'm grateful, is that remembrance seems to be coming, and it seems strange to try and differentiate the remembrance of the all one to the remembrance of the Christ to the remembrance that we are the traveler consciousness.
then don't do that. Just have
Yeah,
your experience and have your knowing, and don't try to define things.
yeah,
It's irrelevant. It's God is love. The essence of it all is love, and the activation of the spirit through us produces a loving. So those are the thing we look for, the loving.
yeah,
The name, the rose by any other name would be as sweet. The name and the definition of it
yeah,
is inconsequential to me.
yeah.
Bless you, Richard.
God bless you. Thank you.
Mary Callenbach.
Hello, my name's Mary, and you had talked about many different consciousnesses, and then also about the traveler consciousness. And are all of these? It to me, it seems like that there's like an all-encompassing almost consciousness, and maybe
Yes,
that's the traveler
that's
consciousness, or
yeah, or God. Let's say God. In the end, when I was very young, I wrote a little poem. Really young, isn't that young? I was probably like 19, 18. And I've said it in different ways, but it basically said something like, Oh, they're not going to let me tell you, so never mind. But yes, in the end, there's only God. That was the
Oh,
last line of the poem. So I could tell you that part. So in the end, there's only God. But in the end, there's only God. In the beginning, there's only God. And so it's all God. A lot of the individuation is, oh, supportive of us because we are inside of us as human beings approaching God, seeing ourselves as an individuated consciousness, an individuated state. Eventually, we're going to wake up to the truth of our oneness with an undifferentiated state, whether so you can wake up to the reality of yourself as a soul. And when you wake up to the truth of yourself as a soul, which is an individuation of God, as a soul, you could know and sense your oneness with all other souls, with all the other individuations of God that had taken a soulic form. But at some point, then you would have the opportunity to go beyond the individuation of soul, let that go, and come to the realization that your nature is spirit. And as the nature of spirit, you realize, well, you have a oneness with the spirit, and wherever the spirit is, you have a oneness with it, which would be then, well, spirit, we'd say, is sort of in everything. So you have a oneness with everything. But within the spirit, there are octaves of spirit. Let me try and explain this a little bit. This is really esoteric. There's in one of the other teachings of like the sound current or the higher realms kind of thing, there's a group. I think this might go back to Guru Nanak, but anyway, they talked about beyond the soul, these three dimensions of God, and they gave them names, and they said Alak, Agam, and Anami. So Alak, Agam, and Anami. So they would be like and one of them would be like and then these would be like translations for the inaccessible one, the unknowable one, and the nameless one. Okay. Now all this doesn't really matter, but I'm giving you an idea. These are different approaches where consciousness is like, let's say, masters or meditators are trying to give a recognizing a differentiation and trying to somehow describe it or talk about it in a way that would help others to relate to what they were talking about. But if you got into any of those places, it's almost impossible to describe the difference, but you will know the difference because to really be in those levels and have consciousness of them, in a sense, you have to be knowing them as spirit. You have to first you can sort of know them as the soul, but as you go up in them, you start to know them as a spirit. It's almost like you have to shift your paradigm of perception to be conscious of them. They are each of those you could look at as a different octave of spirit. Their spirit reality, spirit dimension, but one is higher than the other higher. But what does higher mean there? Let's say it's less defined. It has less definition. It has less tangibility. It has less consequentiality. I'm at a loss to try and explain it. I'm giving you what I'm hearing to try and give it to you. But me talking about it is just information. But if you can let your conscience go, you can start to become aware of this.
so the awareness is really the remembrance.
Yeah,
It's
because
when we go into
when you come into that and you have awareness of it, if you really have an awareness, you'll have this incredible familiarity and realize you've, you, you and the truth of you and the essence of you have always known this. But when you entered into the singularity, first of the time and space of human, but even as the individuation of the soul, there was a level of losing track of the truth of these greater things.
The truth of what? I'm sorry.
The truth of these higher octaves.
Oh,
To really be conscious of, you have to be conscious of them as the spirit. There's a saying in the Bible that says that God is to be worshipped in spirit. And I would take that and I'd say, well, God is to be worshipped in spirit as spirit. But until we can do it as spirit, if we can connect to the spirit, then we'll worship God in spirit from our soul. But eventually, to really, in a sense, travel into it, or in a sense, move your beingness into it, into the oneness of it. At some point, you'll let go of the soul story, the individuation, and you'll know it as spirit. This is the potential and the destiny of every being. It's in the inevitability. But when and how and all that takes place that's not something I know. It's where it's like when the statement that not one soul will be lost. It's kind of like, well, God will never lose any part of itself. So eventually every part of God will be conscious of itself as God. I don't know if this is helping you or not, because this is
yeah, it is.
really out there stuff. But while I'm talking to you about it in the spirit world, it's being revealed and shown. I feel like I'm blabbering on while they just show it, but they're showing it to everybody. But it's like for those that have the eyes to see and the ears to hear.
There's a like surrender goes with it. And I don't want to say need for it, but that it's all kind of it's kind of all intertwined.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you try and sort it out with your mind and figure it out, it's gonna waste your time. I certainly did that for lifetimes. But in the end, it doesn't understanding it mentally doesn't do a thing. Because then it actually can almost hold us back, because then our mind wants to pretend that we really know about this. Usually to really get into this, there's a degree of getting past the mind. And to be really conscious of it, there's a lot of getting past the mind. For me, there was a very distinctive, almost taking my mind away from me at one point in my life, where I just became very, very quiet inside, and my memory just became very difficult. And I still have that problem, which was funny because before I had it, I had an extraordinary memory, not a perfect memory, but just very, very exceptional memory. But it was obstructing me because I kept trying to understand through my mind, and that was getting in the way of what the spirit was intending. So for you, the magic words are let go and let God. Easier said than done, but if we surrender, God will do it for us.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Mary. Bless you. Ruth.
Hi.
Hello, Ruth.
Hi, thank you. I'm so happy that you call me that I'm here, that every week
I'm
I'm
glad
here.
you are. Welcome, welcome, welcome. How can I support you, and how can you support us?
I was listening to you, and when you were talking about sometimes our own issues in life, our drama, or maybe, well, our learning processes sometimes interferes with our God remembrance.
Mhm.
And I was thinking, because sometimes I feel like the brain is part of the tricking point, and a lot of times we speak those things out without thinking, or with really using our hearts
Mhm.
to do that and to acknowledge that. And I've been working a lot with letting go, let God. And when you were talking about that specific situation about how we, is what was my understanding, obviously, sometimes maybe we step aside a little bit when our own issues in life really, instead of help us, take us away from that God remembrance, even though if we always want to be in that remembrance of our love for God and everything. How can we, or how can I be more aware of that little or tiny situation that can hurt our own feelings when we step aside because of our own learning processes in this life?
Well, the essence of your questions seem to be, how can I be more aware? The mastery of our expression and our experience on this planet is really about, can we be in the remembrance? Another way of saying it is, can we be in that remembrance such that we will choose loving even when all the experiences and all the information that's sort of coming to us from the world is pushing on us to forget and pushing on us to choose less than loving. So I'm going to encourage you to remember that there is a spiritual law John Roger taught about, which he said the spiritual law of assumption. And the spiritual law of assumption says if you want God consciousness, you must assume it. So in this case for you, it's about practice with, or your meditation, your spiritual exercise with this assumption that you are already one with God, and that God is chanting your tone, that God is looking through your eyes, that God is singing the sound current, that God is serenading you with divine melodies, that God is beating your heart, that God is breathing the body in and out, that God is not simply just in this body, but God is all around the body, and that God is everywhere. God is all around this earth, and you're with that God that's all around this earth. God is all over this galaxy, and you're with the God around this galaxy. God is all through this universe, and you're that God that's all through this universe. God is through all the universes, and you're with that God through all the universes. And with this, there is that peace that surpasses all understanding, that joy you feel right now. So what I just shared with you, you can do with yourself. The spirit that helps make that possible, or let's say that form of spirit we often call the traveler consciousness or mystical traveler consciousness is always present, is always available. It is entirely available, entirely to be utilized into this remembrance and into this awareness of the oneness of God. It's about awareness and remembrance. All right, Ruth, bless you.
Bless you. I love you. All the angels and archangels surround you always. And my God keep blessing us always.
Always, and bless you too. And thank you.
Thank you.
Jane.
Jane, please unmute.
Hello, Jane.
Hello. This is my first time sharing with you. Um, I had minor surgery today, and I just wanted to share something. At that moment when you start feeling that anesthetic going into your veins, this man said, "Hello, I'm your anesthesiologist, and I'm going to be taking very good care of you."
Mm.
And I just, then I was out. But when I
Yeah.
came to, that was most foremost on my mind, because it just felt like an angel watching over me. And it brought me back to a time when I was traveling out east on Ohio Turnpike. And the change maker, you give him your money, he gives you your change. He said, "God bless you." And, when you look back on those things, it's more than just a man saying the words. It was, to me at least, what better place to have an angel than on a turnpike, when you're going on a long trip.
Yeah.
And I just felt so grateful for both of those instances, especially today afterwards. I just really wanted to tell, you can't find them, but I wanted to tell him how meaningful that was to me. And that's basically all I had.
Why don't you tell him inside? A lot of
Oh,
things will go on in surgeries. A lot of contact from the spiritual worlds happens then, and it's a great chance to strengthen your connection to the spiritual world.
Thank
That,
you.
that sense of, I'll call it almost a euphoria you had when you came back. It does look like there was involvement with it, angelic with you, and some spiritual teacher help there. They'll sometimes move or change karmas during surgeries because the bridge of consciousness between the spiritual and visible worlds and physical world is more bridgeable. It's more knowable. So
Okay.
I've had a lot of great experiences under anesthesia. So I kind of look forward to it, to be honest. So it's there. But you don't have to do anything with it, but just take it. And the gratitude you feel for that man is take that gratitude and utilize it in your life, and be thankful for your life and thankful that you are taken care of and the spirit walks with you, and that you walk a path of grace, and that the goodness of God is entirely available to you, but also through you. Because of your attention to it, you start to become a bridge and a conduit that others might partake.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that sharing. Bless you. All right. I think we got probably a little just about time to end, a little bit over. So let's do a little sayonara prayer. And Beloved Lord, beloved Archangel Michael, we, together with you, hold forth in celebration and thankfulness to the great blessings that have been bestowed to us in this gathering and in our lives. We choose that thankfulness as our constant companion, that it might uplift us and illuminate us in the times when the distractions and the darkness of the world would consume us. Help us to be available more consistently to this truth. Bless us in all the ways that we might participate with you in the divine service and participate in fullness and in completeness in the transformation of consciousness, the consciousness we carry individually and also the consciousness of all in this creation. Let us be available to the greater purpose as you have been available to us this evening. Bless you and bless us all, and thank you. Amen. And so it is.